Cape Cod Broadcasting weaves the listening environments of 99.9 WQRC, Ocean 104.7, WFCC Classical 107.5, Cape Country 104, and CapeCon.com's website experience to reflect the lifestyles of the people who live, work, and play on Cape Cod. We hope that you enjoy this podcast.
I'm Laura Reckford, and this is Sunday Journal. I'm here in the studio with Tony Antin, who has done a wide range of things over the past 9 decades, from serving in the Army during World War II to ambulance crew chief to ski patrol to lead tenor and barbershop quartets. And at the age of 92, he's going full on into a career in poetry. Tony, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Now, you're 92 years old. Let's start by you telling us about your early years. You were born in 1923. America was a very different place back then.
Yeah, it certainly was. Well, the first I can remember about working was I started my first career when I was 8 years old. I was washed up by the time I was 12. I was a boy soprano. And I had a radio show at WBRB in Red Bank, New Jersey. I got $15 a week from a local jeweler. That was when my father was making $13 a week in the factory. This was in the Depression, the real Depression.
And when you came in and sat down at the mic, you were telling me that you remember that was the last time you were at a microphone in a radio studio.
Yes, right. And that time, the microphone was quite different than this. It was a big round circle of metal with 4 springs and a carbon mic sitting in the middle of it. You had to sing sideways into it, otherwise you got a lot of poop, poop, that kind of sound.
Your career was short-lived, but it sounds like you were doing very well in it.
Yeah, well, I was, but then, as I said, that time in Depression, we sang anywhere where we could make $1 or $2, and I even in the roadhouses. And I remember the night when I reached for the last note, and somewhere over the rainbow, it wasn't there anymore.
That was the end of that
and
career.
One time later, long later, I was speaking in South Africa. And in one of those countries when they had apartheid and they had direct current, and I had a slideshow type talk, and in the middle of it, everything blew out. And so I went through my routine of about 10 minutes of jokes, and that lights are still out. So I started to sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And halfway through, the lights came on, so I started to go back to my script, and I said, "Finish the song."
They wanted to hear that song.
When I finished the song, they roared and clapped and cheered. I said, "I'm not going to do my talk anymore. I can't do better than that."
Absolutely not. And so you were born in New Jersey?
Yes, in Newark, New Jersey. And then I spent my kids' time, boyhood time, in Red Bank, New Jersey, along the shore.
I understand you wrote your first poem at age 13, and it was because of something terrible that had happened.
Yeah. A hit-and-run driver killed my best friend on a bicycle, and I wrote a poem about it, an outrage, and they ran it in the Red Bank Daily Standard. That was the first time anything was published, although I wasn't terribly thrilled about that as a publication.
That poem must have really come from the heart.
It did, and most of the other poetry does too, from the heart and from the brain. People ask, well, where do you get the ideas from for a poem? I don't know. Sometimes while you're shaving, the first line comes to you.
And now you had a long career at Reader's Digest. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, I was with, then at that time, Carnegie Tech. And a friend of mine had gone to Reader's Digest and lured me there. But just at that time, I was interviewed to be an editor. But just at that time, they were beginning to accept advertising. And they asked me, would I go down to New York City and help with the advertising division for a while? Well, that turned out to be 40 years. 30 years active and 10 more years with them.
Quite a long career with Reader's Digest.
And it was fascinating in this respect, perhaps. I don't know. It was fascinating to me anyway. the editors of Reader's Digest seem to be able to take just about any subject you can name and make it interesting and understandable to millions of people. We had an audience of 50 million every month.
Amazing.
And so I began to study up what do these editors do that make them so successful with headlines. Digest headlines were famous.
Absolutely.
And then I said, does these things apply to advertising too? And they did. So that led to a very interesting seminar about showing how these fundamental principles of magazine communication applied both in advertising and in print. The advertising industry found that pretty interesting and ended up with a book, Great Print Advertising by John Wiley.
Very interesting. Now, along the way, all during your career, all those decades, you had a number of different hobbies and extracurricular activities, some of them really unique experiences. I had mentioned some of them in the introduction to the show, ski patrol. Tell us about some of those things.
The one that fascinates me most and has been my passion for 70 some odd years now is rowing. Everybody's heard of the boy in the boat. Well, that was me, the coxswain, in the back of this 8-oared shell with 8 beautiful men in front of me. And then after I stopped being the coxswain, I got a different college. I became a referee, and I was a referee for years and years. And then later on still, Jean and I lived on Long Pond in Centerville, and we had a little boathouse. She had a shell. Jean is 87. I had a shell, and we rowed. People used to ask us kind of amazement, oh, you're the people who row, as if rowing was some kind of weird activity.
You've been doing it practically all your life, it sounds like.
Oh, yes, I have, and it's a marvelous sport. That's why so many identified with the boys in the boat. You use every muscle in your body, but none with any impact. And it's therapeutic. We have one stone wall on Long Pond, and I hit it because I had my eyes closed. I was rowing. Anybody who's ever rowed before will know what I'm talking about. And I was in Never Never Land as I rowed along, and suddenly, crack. The ambulance business came about also interestingly. I was a scoutmaster, and my son was an Eagle Scout, and then he was going into exploring scouting. And there the explorer posts have a specialty. And we decided it was going to be first aid, ambulance. And today, Post 53 in Darien, Connecticut, is the ambulance of the town, still manned by high school kids.
Now, what brought you to Centerville? You lived in Centerville for 20 years or so. What brought you to the Cape?
And we thought we'd come up here and buy one of those houses on the golf course. And then we said, well, we really want to row, so we could always drive to a golf course. So let's fly on water instead. So that brought us to Centerville, 20 years of absolutely wonderful, wonderful living.
I'm Laura Reckford, and this is Sunday Journal. I'm here in the studio with Tony Antin, the 92-year-old author of a new book on poetry, Love in Old Age. Now, Tony, you said you wrote this book as somewhat of a protest about what is published today as poetry. Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, I think the people who are listening will understand what I mean when I say there was a time, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, when if you asked somebody, who was your favorite poet, they'd name one, maybe 2 or 3, and they would recite lines from them. Today, if you ask somebody, do you read poetry? They look at you with amazement, amusement. Say, what? No, of course not. Why don't they? Well, it doesn't relate to them. They don't get any satisfaction from it. They don't understand what they're talking about, and it doesn't seem like the poetry of those days. For example, I have a name for one type of poetry. I call it poems by typography. It's a case of where you're wandering around a stage, but you wear a tutu, and you say this is ballet, where they just simply put one line after the other, having no relationship to each to the other. But let's put it in stanzas. and short lines, and they say that's a poem. Well, I don't think so. A poem to me has to have structure. It has to have a build. It's like if you had a whole pile of lumber and you laid it out on the lawn so it looked like a house, it's still not a house. You have to construct it. You have to have a structure. And so I believe a poem must have a structure which the poet declares in his first few lines and then stays to. That's the hard work of poetry as opposed to prose. It's not just one pretty line after the other. The other peeve I have is so many poets seem to be totally self-centered, writing line after line that has meaning only to them. I call those, why publish it? Put it in your diary. So that's my protest against the poems. Obviously, it's a very, very weak voice. All of the people who teach poetry, all of the inside crowd that write poems for each other, they would never publish one of my poems. They would never give it any award.
Well, you call your poetry plain written poems. I'm going to ask you to read the title poem, Love in Old Age, and it was written for your wife, Jean, a few years ago on your 60th anniversary, and now you've been married 67 years. And before reading the poem, I wonder if you could tell us, Tony, how the two of you met.
Oh, and when I was at Rutgers after the war, all the girls at New Jersey College for Women, which was the sort of the female side of Rutgers, who were taller than me, looked after me. And one night, one of them called Gladys Cravat, we called her Gravy, and said, "We've got a pretty little Scotch girl here you've got to meet." Well, we met, and for me, that was it. And we got married about a year later after that. We still look at each other with amazement, and we both say we're really, really lucky because, you know, you can love somebody but not like them. And we've ended up liking each other.
That's wonderful. I think we'll get that from hearing this poem. So let's hear the poem. This is Tony Antin, 92-year-old poet, reading his poem, the title poem in his new book of poetry. The poem is called Love in Old Age.
Yes. If they had asked me then, if I remembered when it was I first realized I was in love with you, I would have said, I knew when first I kissed with you and felt the love come through your lips, the warmth come through your lips to mine. And then through all the years of happiness and some tears, the love we felt was always there and remained unchanged. But now, in our old age, we've turned another page, and we have felt a new and warmer love. It's nothing like before. There's something so much more. A loving kinship. Kinship's what they're now. And seeing in your face, through lines that aging trace, that lovely, sweet expression I've always loved. And at last I have learned what I had not discerned. There is a private part of you that you must keep. The best of all decisions I recall, the best was asking you to marry me. And when I say that, I am seeing Jean, and she does have still such a lovely face. It's a one. I have a little postscript there to be added when I'm gone. And now that I have closed my eyes in last repose, I chose, I hope, the kindest time to say goodbye. I'm sorry, I choke up a little bit thinking about it.
It's a lovely, lovely poem. And I think that you have another poem to go to a more upbeat poem. That one is so beautiful. But perhaps you can read to us another poem that you call your most fun poem, the poem Slow This Engine Down. It's performed to the tune of the Wabash Cannonball. Tell us about this poem, and then let's hear you read it.
All right. In my mid-80s, I'm 90, as you said, 92 now, I began to notice that everything seemed to be going faster and faster and faster, including my atrial arrhythmic heart, which was pounding as it always does all over the place. Then one morning while I was shaving, I just said something to myself in the mirror. Hey, you've got to slow this engine down. That led to another line about my engine's always racing. And it went on, and after I'd finished it, it has verses and choruses. I said, gee, this goes beautifully with the Wabash Cannonball, which incidentally was written way back in 1882, and it was called then the Great Rock Island Route. But finally, the real big push with Roy Acuff recording it in 1936. In the middle of the Depression, he sold 10 million copies of it. And what I do is I sing the verse, and then the chorus, and all the audience joins in in singing the chorus. We'll skip the choruses, so I'll just do the chorus first so you hear it, what it's like, then do the verses, and then finally a chorus.
I can't wait. Go ahead.
All right. My engine's always racing, red light every day. I'm running overheated, and I can't go on this way. I'm always feeling tired, I'm never sleeping sound. Where's the carburetor to slow this engine down? Down, 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 tiddle-diddy down, down, down. They said to give up coffee and brew some herbal tea, then sit and sip and sip and sit as quiet as I can be. I tried it with some chamomile and other herbals too. None of them were any good. They took too long to brew. Brew, 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 diddle-diddy brew, brew, brew. Someone suggested fishing with nothing on for bait, and then to sit there patiently and wait and wait and wait. I did as was suggested. I thought I did it right, but I was interrupted every time I felt the bite. Bite, 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 tiddle-diddy bite, bite, bite. You've got to have a banjo. I'm in a guitar in the back of this. I tried some meditation, sitting all alone, fingertips together, disconnected phone. I listened to my breathing. I slowly hummed a song, but I had to give that up because the sessions took too long. Long, 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 diddle-diddy long, long, long. So my engine's always racing, red line every day. I'm running overheated and I can't go on this way. I'm always feeling tired, I'm never sleeping sound. Where's the carburetor to slow this engine down? Diddle-dee down.
Bravo. I think you've just made my day, or maybe my week or my month. That was wonderful. And Tony has come out with a book of poetry. You can go to a local bookstore and ask for Love in Old Age by Tony Antin. It's put out by Mill City Press. And unfortunately, we're out of time. Tony, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Well, absolutely, Laura. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
I'm Laura Reckford, and this is Sunday Journal.
This podcast is a presentation of Cape Cod Broadcasting, which is solely responsible for its content. Thank you for listening. For more information, please visit us at capecodbroadcasting.com.